Hello, and welcome to the HTML5 lecture series at SNHU. I'm Tom Adamson, visiting professor. This is lecture 18 on DOM examples. Now you might say, wait a minute, what's DOM? Well, we should know what that is from previous lectures. DOM stands for the Document Object Model. And we had a lecture, if you recall, on introducing what the DOM was. On this one, I want to give a few examples about the DOM, because it's been my experience in showing this to students. If I start explaining the details of the document object model, they get bored, and I can understand why. It's like, well, why should I care about that? So what I'm going to do first in this lecture is get some examples that hopefully are sort of cool and relatively interesting. So let's see, what is the purpose of the document object model? It's a standard way, for accessing and manipulating manipulating HTML elements. Okay, what it is, it's a standard way for accessing and manipulating HTML elements. Now, from previous lectures, we should know what elements are, so I'm not going to get into that. If you don't know, go back and look at the lecture on what elements are. Here's what I would like to do for my first example, because it's meaningful enough to be interesting, but not complex to code, not really complex to code. What I'd like to be able to do is I'd like to make on the web page, I'd like to make a slider bar where I can move it back and forth on the web page. And then I'd like to make it so that there's a text box here next to it. And as I move the slider bar, the numeric value of where the slider is shows here. Like, for example, I can make the slider so that the minimum value is 0 and the maximum value is 100. I could program that on the web page. So as I move it here, you'd see the numbers getting closer to 0. As I move it this way, you would see the numbers getting closer to 100. So what I want to do is try something like that. So in order to do that, I'm going to code it. And what I'd like is if the camera can now go to the monitor here and stay on the monitor while I do the coding. And I'm going to right-click. I just have a folder up here. That's all I have. I'm going to right-click on the folder, and I'm going to put New. And when I come to New, I'm going to go to my favorite HTML editor, which is Notepad. And I'm going to call this, let me call it the DOM. I could call it anything I wanted to. And delete the extension and put .html. I'll get a warning message that this isn't good. I click on it, and what I get now, it thinks it's a browser. Okay, so what I'm going to do is if I double click on it and open it, there's nothing there because I haven't put anything in. I haven't put anything in this web document. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to open it with Notepad, and there's Notepad there, and I'm going to put in some HTML code. So I'm going to start this out with HTML. Okay, and then I'm going to, this is the head. This should be familiar. Here's the head element. I'm going to put in the title element, and I'll call it my DOM example. Okay, no big deal. And of course, an element has an opening tag and a closing tag. At least this element does. So there's my opening closing tag. And now I'm going to put in here for script, because it's in the script that I'm going to put the document object model. Okay. I don't put anything in there yet because I'm not sure what to put in there. Anyway, that ends my head element, and now I'm going to start the body element. And I'll put, say, an H2 here, and this is a DOM example. Okay, and then I'll put a period, and then I'll close this off, H2, like that. Okay, and then what I'll do is I'll close off the body. Now I finished the body element, and then I'll finish the root element, which is HTML. And I'll come up here and I'll save it like that, and I'll come over here and refresh it, and I see this is a DOM example, and I look up here on the tab and I see the title. Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to put in a range element, and to do that I put in input. Whoops. I have to put this in input, PUT, type, TYPE, equals range. And these are the attributes for the input element. The type is going to be range. The minimum value, let's make the minimum value equal to 0. Whoops. And let's make the maximum value equal to 100. And remember, when we do attributes, we do them in value pairs. And this is a void element, so I'm going to close it off. Let's see what this looks like now through the browser. I'm going to come up here to File, and I'm going to save it. And I'm going to come over here and refresh this. And now, can you see that slider? I can't make it any bigger. We might have to zoom in with the camera. But there's my range now. Essentially, one line of code allowed me to have a range. Now, what I don't have yet is I don't have that little output place there for text to show the values of the range. So I'm going to put that next. I'm going to come down here, and it's going to be another input element, type, and this time the type is going to be equal to text. Okay, it doesn't need a minimum or maximum value, and I'm going to close it off. So there's the other one, and let's go ahead and save this. Come here, File, and Save, and come here and refresh. Okay, and there it is. There's for the values. And I can try and open this up more. Yeah, there we go. Maybe we can see it better on the camera. Now as I move this switch, this range switch, nothing appears on the text. And the reason that nothing appears on the text is coming back over to here to my document, is that I haven't made any relationship between the text input and the range input. What I need to do here is I need to put something that's going to make that relationship happen. So I'm going to put here a function. And remember, we talked about functions. And it starts off with the keyword function, and then I have a function identifier, which I'm going to call doIt. Okay. And then I'm going to come here, and I'm going to start the body of the function, which defines the function. And now what I'm going to use is I'm going to use a document object model. But before I do that, I'm going to come down here to text, and I'm going to give this an ID. I'm going to give it another attribute that I call the ID, and I'm going to call it T1 for text. So I came down here, and I identified this particular input as T1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate that I can put a value in it from the program. So I'm going to say document get element by ID, and I'm going to put here T1. Whoops, like that. And I'm going to put value. And I'm going to put equals, let me just put 10, and I'll put it inside quotation marks. I'll put a semicolon. And then what I'm going to do here is where the text is, I'm going to come down here. I'm going to have an input IMPUT type equals button. And I'm going to put an event on click equals, remember we had events, we already talked about events. I'm going to put do it. And then what I have to put the parentheses here, do it. And then what I also need is a value, and the value is going to be click. Come on, back here, whoops. Right here. I'm going to stretch this out so you can see it better. Okay. Let me put value equals click me. Come on. ME. And I'll put an exclamation mark there. That's going to be the value that's on the button. So what's going to happen with this button is that when I click it, it's going to call the function do it. And when the function do it is called, it's going to set a value of 10 inside the element that has the ID of T1. Well, what element has the ID of T1? It's the text element. So after all this, let's hope this works. I'm going to save it. I'm going to come here and refresh it. And there's my button, click me. I'm going to click on it, and there's the value of 10. Now, let me explain what's happened here. Stay on the screen, please. What I've done here is that we've had this before in previous lectures, what a function is, how I call a function. That's the keyword, that's the identifier. It has to have the parentheses. It needs a little left squiggly thing here and a little right squiggly thing, and between these squiggly things goes all of the code that the function must perform. What's new is this thing here, document.getElement by ID, and here I have lowercase letters. All of a sudden I have an uppercase E, all of a sudden I have an uppercase B, an uppercase I, and then I have this thing here inside parentheses. I have another dot with value, and that's a lowercase. What's going on here? Can I make this E a lowercase? Can I make this by a lowercase? And the answer is no, you can't. And this is what I need to explain. What the document object model is that it takes the document, which is this. This is the document. And it says, get the element that has the ID of T1. Well, I only have one element that has an ID of T1. If I had more than one element that had that same ID, T1, this would get confused and it wouldn't work. So the element ID is a unique way of identifying different elements. Like I could have an element ID for the input range, which I could call, say, R1. I can pick anything I want. And this is now going to be the value. What this uses, this is a phrase, get element by ID. And now I need to come to the board to explain what's happening with this. If you understand this, if you understand what looks like a little bit confusing and we make some sense out of it, then the document object model isn't that bad. What I've got is document, lowercase get, uppercase E, uppercase B, lowercase y, uppercase I, lowercase d. And then this particular one, I had T1 for text, and then I had dot value. What this lowercase, and uppercase is called, it's called camel case. And it's used by programmers. And why it's called camel case is because I have lowercase, uppercase, lowercase, uppercase, lowercase, upper. It's sort of like the humps on a camel's back. That's why it's called camel case. And here's the rule for camel case. You take any new phrase or any new phrase, like the phrases are separated by dots here, okay? This is a new phrase document. You always start with the first word in lower case. Okay, so if I look at the phrase, the first word here is document, and it starts lowercase. Dot, new phrase. Get, well, this is the first word, it starts in lowercase. By ID, dot, new phrase, value. Okay, this is the first word, starts in lowercase. every other word after the first word must start with a capital letter. That's the rule for camel case, and that's consistent in the document object model. So what we have here now, lowercase, first word lowercase, second word within that phrase, capital E, second word within this phrase, which is by, capital B, second word, the 1, 2, 3, fourth word in this phrase is ID, so it's a capital I, lowercase d. And then this right here, this must replicate what the ID was for that particular element. And here we are, we have another phrase, value, okay, and that's the first word, so it's going to be lowercase. So without being too repetitive, that's the secret of that particular thing. Okay, what I want to do is let's go back here to the screen here and stay on the screen. I'll do some more coding. I need to make it so that I can relate this right here, the value that's going to be here. I need to relate it to the value that's coming from this range switch. I don't want the button. I want to make it so when I change the range switch, I'm going to take this bottom thing off here. When I change the range switch, it automatically changes on that text box. That's what I'd like to have. So what I need to do here for my input type range, I need to give that an ID as well. So I'm going to call this ID is equal to, since it's the range, I'll call it R1, because I might have more than one range, which I'd call R2 and so on. Now what this is going to equal to up here, this is not just going to equal one number, because I have to have it so it can equal a range of numbers. Let me bring this over here just a little bit so that we can hopefully have all this on one line. What this is going to be equal to, this is going to be equal to document get element by ID R1 dot value. And I always end it in a semicolon. Now let me open this up more so we can see it. Okay, and I need to put parentheses around that R1. So stay on the monitor there. I'll just come up. So what I've done here is I've identified this element here, which is it's an input element, and the type here is the range. I've identified it as R1. So now what I'm going to do is this right here, this value will be changing. So I'm going to make it so that the text area is equal to the document get element by R1 value. So as I change the value of this, that value will now appear inside this text box. So I need some kind of event that makes it so when I'm changing this, that event will constantly do this calculation. So let's stay on the screen here, and I'll do an event. And the event that I'm going to do is on the range switch. And what the event is going to be is on change, on change. Remember, we already talked about events. And on change, I'm going to call that function do it. Okay. Now, stay on the screen. I'm going to show what I've done here. Remember, we talked about event attributes. On change was one of the events. So on change, every time this value changes, in other words, every time I move this bar, it's going to say, call this function do it. Every time it calls the function do it, it's going to get whatever this value is for the range switch and then put it into this box here. So fingers crossed, let's see if it works. We're going to stay on the screen here. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to do a file and a save. And we all know that it works right the first time. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to refresh this. And now there's my switch and I'm going to move it. And what do I see? Do you see it changing now? Because every time I change this, the event is on change. And every time I change it, it's calling that function which uses the document object model to relate those two elements to each other. Now, to me, that's pretty cool. It didn't take a lot of code to do this. I did this in a very simple text editor. I didn't have to use anything that I had to buy or to pay for. And you might say, well, that's pretty cool. Well, let me show you some other stuff that I think is pretty cool. What I'm going to do now with the input type range, I'm going to take this off right here. I'm not going to call it range. I'm going to call it color. Ooh. Can I really do this? Yes, I think I can. All right, the color doesn't have a minimum or maximum value. And it doesn't, so I'm going to take that off, the minimum maximum value. I just changed the attribute of the input type, the color. And what I'm going to do, let me, instead of R1, I'll call it C1 for color 1. And then I'll come up here and I'll put color 1. But here's what I want to do with this. Here's what I want to do with this. I'm going to change the document object model. Watch what I'm doing here. This is now C1 for color 1. Instead of value, I want it to be style. And the style is going to be background. Well, I don't want that particular background. Let me see what I can do. How about if I do document, body, style, S-T-Y-L-E, and S-T-Y-L-E, I'll get it, dot background. And that's going to be equal to that's going to be equal to what? That's going to be equal to the color. Is that right? Document, get element by ID. And that's going to be equal to C1, color 1. And that's going to be the value. Okay, so I'm going to take away the text because I don't need that. I'm going to take that away. And then if this works, I'll explain it. If it doesn't work, we'll simply edit this out, and you'll never know that I really goofed. Okay, so I'm going to refresh this now. And there is my color. I'm going to click on this right here, and I'm going to make it a green. I'm going to put OK. And look, the whole background is green. It worked. So now that it worked, I can explain to you what it is that I did. So we'll stay on the screen then and see what happened. Okay.
Do you want to just make the screen flat against the camera because it looks tilted?
Okay. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah. Good. Good, Danny. Thank you. If I can turn this guy. Yeah, I know what you mean. Mm-hmm. I need it tilted a little bit so I can get in there. Okay, but thank you. That's great. Okay, here's what we did, or what I did here, is that I used another document object model. I used the document, body, there's the body element, style, because I want the style of this to change, background, because I want the background to change. Notice I use camel case. Every one of these phrases, there's just one word, so they're all lowercase. So I was okay with that. I didn't need an identifier because this right here says it's going to be the body. And there's the body element right there, so it can't miss it, and it's about the style. Now, this dude here should be familiar. This says document, dot get element by ID, the camel case, C1 for color, and the value. You might say, wait a minute. What I got here was an input type color, this dude, and you're saying this returns a value? Yes, it does. It returns the color value. So this is another example of what I think it's pretty cool for the document object model. Okay, so if we can come back here on the board here, what I've given now are a few examples of how you can use the document object model. And that was really the purpose of this particular lecture. So that's it for this lecture. Thank you for attending. Then you can kill it.